So another Patreon Q&A. Thank you again, Patreons, so much for your support. Thank you also, PathSet, for donating your commercial collections to the monthly giveaways we have on Discord. If you are a Patreon, come join us on the Patreon Discord channel for, again, monthly giveaways, monthly challenges, and a lovely community. If you're not a Patreon, consider joining us also on Patreon for lots and lots of extra content, exclusive videos, presets, extra patches, and more. Let's start with the Q&A. So the first question is from Nick. Hi, Nick. I know you're a big fan of quantizers, and especially in VC VRAC, almost always elect to use a quantizer for melodic sequences. I'm curious, though, if you have any suggestions or tips for people working in hardware and may not have access to a quantizer for whatever reason. You've shared many tips in the past demonstrating creative uses of quantizers, such as mixing envelopes and other unconventional CV sources into pitch CV before running it through a quantizer to yield unique melodies and sequences. Do you know of any similarly creative techniques that are only possible without the use of a quantizer, the kinds of patches that work best with fully continuous analog tunings? So no, I always use a quantizer, you're right. Whenever I deal with pitch information, I need a quantizer. My ears are not used to unquantized melodies and notes, quantized to the Western scales and modes. I could not think of anything that you can do to change pitch without using a quantizer, unless you don't care about staying in a certain scale. I think a quantizer, even the simplest quantizer in a hardware setup, is always nice to have, especially if you want to stay in certain scales, or you want to be quantized at least to semitones. But what you can do is use the same techniques, but not for pitch. So you can use them for modulation. Right, so you said an example about mixing envelopes. So there's a technique that you can mix an envelope with a pitch sequence, run it through a quantizer, and then you get glissando. So in this case, if you don't have a quantizer, you can still use it for modulation. The same technique. You have a modulation sequence mixed with an envelope, right? It is being triggered at certain times, and this you use for modulation, in this case, modulating a filter. Right, so you can use these techniques also for other things than pitch. For example, also chaining sequences, right? Sometimes you have a few pitch sequences that you want to change. You want a chain, you want to have a sort of a progression, let's say. So you can switch between them with a sequential switch. You can do the same also for modulation. So you have here three different sequences, modulation sequences in this case, right? Going through a sequential switch, and it's switching between them, so you get more variation, but it's still very repetitive and rhythmic. Right, so you can use the same techniques you use for pitch, you can use also for modulation, for continuous CV, as you say. I couldn't think of anything that used for pitch that you don't. It's not that you need a quantizer, but if you wanted to stay in a certain scale, especially if you have other voices, then you will need somehow to correct the voltage into steps of semitones, into steps of the scale. But again, you can use the same techniques you use for pitch, you use also for modulation. The next question is coming from Lachlan, I guess. I really loved your most recent sequences performance. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could explain a little about your process and the harmonic choices, note timing choices you made for the patch. So first of all, there is a walkthrough video. It's open for all tiers, so you can watch it. It's going through the patch. But I will show you also the harmony now. I believe you aren't keeping to any particular scale, so I was just wondering how you went about choosing the notes for the various sequencers, given that they all had different timings, etc. So I did work in a certain scale. Sometimes what I will do in many cases, I will sit at the piano or at the keyboard and I will try to think of a progression or some sort of notes that go well together. Just like in this case, I went with a scale. I want to show you this also. I have here, it's the same patch, but just very simplified without the whole, instead of all of the sound design and voices, I just use FM operators, but it's the same sequences and everything. And again, look on Patreon, there is a walkthrough video about the patch itself. And I want to show you what I did here, music-wise, I guess, or harmony-wise. So there is a scale, I chose the scale of A minor, which is just the white keys on the keyboard. So I went with A minor, and the progression I had is this. I had, this is not what I wanted, this is what I wanted. I had A minor, F major, G major, and then E major, which is let me show you what's going on here, okay? Just a second. Something didn't stop working here. I'm not so sure why. Let's just reset this, connect this. Okay, because I want to show you the notes. Right, so I went with A minor. And this is a bit music theory, but it's really basic. I'm not an expert on anything about this. And I always say, if you're interested in making music, even if you want it to be atonal, I think anyway, start a bit with music theory, start learning the basics and stuff like this. But anyway, never mind. So I went again with the A minor scale, starting from A on the keyboard. You can see this here on the chords module, and also here on Quantum, you will see the notes playing, right? So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then going back to A, right? This is the A minor scale, which is also, by the way, the C major scale, but never mind now. Right, so this is the scale, and the progression I went with is 1, 6, 7, 5, which means it's the first chord of the scale, which is A minor, right? Then the 6, which is F major, so F, A, C. And then the 7th, which is G, B, D, right? So again. And then there is the 5 chord, the dominant chord, which I used instead of a minor chord, which is in this scale, the 5th is E minor. Instead of this, I went with E major, which is very common to do, because of this note, because of G sharp in this case. And this G sharp is the leading tone, which will give more of a feel like you want to go back to A. So in a minor scale, the 7th note, I'm sorry if it's too confusing, but really look it up because it's really interesting and it's really easy to do and it has a great effect. So the 7th note is G, but in a minor scale, it's a whole tone from the tonic, from the fundamental. Oh, again, it went, never mind. Right, so you have 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 G, and then goes back to A. But if you raise this G, if you raise this 7, it gives much more of a feel like you want to go back to A. Listen to this. This will be without raising it. And now with raising it. Right, this. You want it, it feels like if I stop there, you will need this A to resolve everything. Right? You want to go back to it. So if instead of a minor 5 chord, which is E minor in this case, I use a major one, you will hear this need to go back again to A. Listen to this. Right? If I do this in the normal minor scale without raising the seventh, right? It will sound like this. It will be weaker. Listen to it. Right? It sounds like you can continue to other places and not go back to A again. Let me do this. Okay. Right? It sounds weak, but like this, with the raise 7, this. It wants to go back to A. So there, yes, there is a scale, it's A minor, right? These are the notes. There is a progression. This is the progression. And then I went and I started programming sequences. So I started with a 5-step sequence. Right? This starts with an A minor scale, right? You have A, the D is just a passing note, never mind. Right? You have A, then you have E, then you have A again, and you have C, right? So you have A, C and E, which is the A minor. Then the next one, right? It's F, right? There is A, C, and F, right? Which is the F major chord. The next one is G major, right? Which you have G, D, and C. I say C, I mean B. I say C because it's do, re, mi. Never mind, I mean B. Right, and then there is the E major chord, not E minor. Right? You see this raised 7th? Right, so this is the effect of wanting to go back to A minor, right? And then I make here a sort of a variation, which will be this. Right, and then it goes back. So if this is the song, right? So this is the progression: A minor, F major, G major, E major. Right? And again, it's the raised 7th. And it's a really easy, it's not like something too complex or anything. Everyone uses it. It's really common to see. It's called the harmonic minor scale. Right? Because you use it for harmony, you use it for chords. So this is the scale, this is the first sequence. Now about timings, also the timings here are working together. So again, as I mentioned, there is a 5-step sequence. There are 5 steps in this sequence. The next voice is this solo voice, right? And it has 8 steps. It has 8 steps, but the steps are moving with a divided by 5 clock. Now, why it has 8 steps and a divided by 5? Because here, in the first sequence, right, each of these sequences, 1, 2, and 3, and also 4 with a variation, will run 4 times. So you have a 5-step sequence that runs 4 times. So if I use a clock division of 5 and 8 steps, they will line up together. If I reset everything, here, reset. Right? Step 4. Right, so they are running together. Right, there are 8 steps. Each step is each of the chords playing 4 times. So I have 2 variations. I have 1 cycle and then another cycle. I hope it makes sense. Right? So this is another sequence. The next one is just an E note. It's just an E note running in its own different rhythm, right? And it's an E note because E is the 5th of the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going with any of the chords, right? So if I have A minor, E will go with it, right? If I use F, E still goes with it. It's a bit dissonant, but it's still nice there. G, and of course E, right? So the E is going always there, so I just added an E playing all the time. The next one is the bass, right? Again, program the sequence. In this case, it's just one sequence, right? The notes are A, G, and then the G sharp because of the raised 7th, and then again A, G, and then goes to E, right? Instead of the G sharp, it goes to E. And again, there are 8 steps, so there are 2 cycles for the main sequence, right? Each of the steps is 4 times the chord, right? So there are 2 cycles here. And again, it's running with a clock division of 5, so it's lining up with the main sequence. The next one is this arpeggio, right? Which the notes are A, E, this is not changed, just a second. A, E, C, E, A, right? It's all connected, E. And then here is the leading tone, right? For the E major. Right, so again, if we listen with the first sequence. Right? So it's all very connected. It's I don't know if it sounds, you said it sounds a bit like it's not connected, but there is something there. Right? It's very much supposed to work. I mean, I went and programmed sequences that will work together. So it's not random or anything. And then the last voice is not really connected because I just added this at the end. It's not really playing with anything. Right, this is just coming at the end. But yes, so this is it. There is a scale, there is thought behind this. I really recommend, never mind what you do, even if you don't want to use scales and even if you don't want to use chord progression, still, if you understand the basics, you can choose not to use it instead of not using it because you don't know or because you don't understand it. So you can make it with intention instead of just because you have to, because you don't know what. But especially, never mind, especially if you do want chord progressions, if you do, I really recommend, it's not the basics. What I did here is very common. It's really, there is nothing to it. It's been used millions and millions of times. I didn't invent anything in this progression here. And it's really basic. So if you learn the basics, you can create also stuff like this. And I think it sounds amazing, even though it's being used for millions of times. I still think it's the impact is really interesting, is really fun. And it's all about how you present things and how you deal with sound design and stuff like this, I guess. So again, go watch the video, the patch walkthrough video, also on Patreon, open for all tiers. And I hope this was helpful. The next one is from the Lark Mage. I wanted to ask you about your opinions and workflow surrounding mastering, track patch titling, and album sequencing, the presentation and encapsulation of music production and composition. How do you determine what a particular track needs in terms of EQ, compression, limiting, etc. during the mastering process, and how do you decide which order to apply them in? Do you consider these in context of the other tracks around them on an album, or generally master tracks individually? So I guess this is a lot to do with experience, not experience as knowing better or something, but just experience as what tools you are using and stuff like this. So I have a whole chain that I like using when I mix. I don't like so mix. Let's not speak about mixing. Let's speak about mastering. So mastering, I guess it's everything that has to do after you have a stereo file, right, of the stereo file of the song, let's say of the track that you created. It's already with all the composition and all of the different choices you made are already there. And then you ask yourself, okay, what does it need? So first of all, you have to listen, of course, and see if you hear some sort of frequencies that you don't like, or how is the dynamic range. If the soft parts are soft enough for you and the harder parts are hard enough for you, if you want them all to be like a big sausage and there is no dynamic range, or you want more dynamic range. But usually there is a chain, build yourself a chain and work with it and learn it and see what it does. Sometimes it's more of an artistic choice. I think in many cases, it's more of an artistic choice rather than what a track needs. Sometimes you add compression and you like how it sounds, but it doesn't necessarily need it. It doesn't need it. But still you add it because artistically you like how it sounds. You like what it does to the track. So I don't think there is something the track needs, but after a while when you do this, you get yourself a chain of, if it's plugins, if it's hardware, never mind, and you work with it and you learn it and you progress from there, and then you add things. You say, okay, next time I will not use this compressor, I will use a different compressor. Let's see how it colors the sound. The same with everything, especially also with modular. The less choice you have, I guess, or the less tools you have, the better you can learn them, I guess. So if you have 10 compressors, it will be more difficult to you to make a choice than if you have just 2, for example, right? So try to keep this at minimum. Don't buy now all the different plugins and compressors and everything, because it will not help you. Get one, learn it, see what it does to the sound. I'm not so sure if the track ever needs something. It's more, I don't know. Try and listen. See, it's hard for me to say because every track is individual. Sometimes I will compress it more. Sometimes I will compress it less. Just listen to how it goes. Look at the mirror. I look also a lot. I mix with these headphones. Usually the last, 2 years, 3 years. I mix with headphones. My room is not treated at all. So I'm not an expert on anything, but it's just, I guess I have my chain that I like working with, and that's how I go. If it's an album, then I will try to use the same chain, the same tools throughout the album and make similar decisions to the different tracks. So they will sound, they will sound like a whole, like a cohesive entity. I like albums. I like albums that are not collections of songs, but more like with an idea behind it. So having more or less the same tools, making more or less, of course, each track is different, but making more or less the same decisions will bring them. For example, if you use mid-side processing on one track and you add saturation, for example, to the side, try adding this saturation with different levels, of course, depending on the track, but try adding this saturation to all of the tracks in the album, just to give it more or less the same feel, the same sound, not the same sound, the same feel, the same flow, I guess, and stuff like this, just so it sounds like a whole. If you work just on independent tracks, yeah, then try and see what you think when you listen to the track. What you think? Is it dark? Is it bright? Is it painful in the ears? Is it too dynamic? Right? Is it too dynamic? I don't know. It's stuff that the stuff that most of these things should happen already in the composition process. Yeah, so it's difficult to say, but try to use one chain and learn it. And if you work on an album, try to apply the same choices more or less to the different tracks, just so it sounds more or less cohesive. When composing an album, do you have an idea of how the album will flow from track to track and compose the track to fit that flow? Do you arrange tracks you already have completed to create that flow after the fact? Or is it more or less complex than that for you? So again, I'm old school. I like albums that have an idea behind them, that are not just collection of tracks, although I also have them. If you're familiar with the Opus releases, those Opus releases are just collection of tracks that I recorded and uploaded to YouTube, and then took the ones I like and made a compilation album out of it. But all the other albums, there is always something behind it, always an idea behind it, something that inspires me. Most of the times I will already have names. Maybe that's the next question. I'm not so sure, but I already have names for the tracks. I go less for sound and more for feel. So what I mean is, for example, if I have a track that is called Water Jumping Up and Down, I will not try and make sounds that sound like water jumping up and down. But I go more with the feel of how I feel, how this makes me feel, what I have behind the naming. Usually I will have namings, or I will try to have names. Also for individual tracks, by the way. If I sit down and I have no idea where I'm going, nothing will happen usually. But if I sit down with an idea, especially feel and the name for me is quite important. Then I will have more of a direction, I guess, and also about an album. So I have a list, I have a Google Docs with lots of ideas, and there are also albums there. I have already ideas for albums. It's like clusters of ideas of the album, what the album is about, the feel, the names of the tracks, the order of the tracks. Something that I think about a lot. I really do. I don't think it will work for everyone. It might not work for you also, this process, this workflow, but this is something that works for me. I like having this in my head. I like thinking about it. If I go for a walk, I will think, even before I sit down and compose, I will think about the album. I will think about what it makes me feel, how I want it to feel. Less about sound, less about again, if there is water jumping up and down, I will not try and make sounds that sounds like jumping up and down, but more of the feel of what's behind the idea, behind the tracks. Usually I will record live things. I don't like arranging. I don't like working in a DAW. I will have multi-tracks of everything, and that's it. Sometimes I will overdub stuff, like my flute or some noise or stuff like this, but I will not arrange things. There is one album that I worked on, still not released, and that I recorded like 10 tracks. And from them I selected, I think I will go with 6 at the end, because they are the ones, and all of them had names already. They are like finished tracks. If I wanted, if I liked them all, I could release the album with 10 tracks. But I just removed the ones that I didn't think that were fitting the feel and everything. And yeah, and it's just sitting down with everything already in mind. Most of the time this is how it will be. Sometimes not. There is no rule. Sometimes I will sit down and things will come out, like the Expand album. I worked on patching techniques with the Expand for Make Noise, And I just loved it so much that I said, okay, that's it. I'm going to release this as an EP for free, just for people to listen to this in context, one after the other, because it was so cool. I really like the sound of it. Yes, so using the geometry of a mushroom as an example, the track listing is simple yet mysterious, inviting in a way, more esoteric concepts as track titles. After listening to the album altogether, there is a very strong flow track to track, and taking one track and moving it to a different place within the album would seemingly disrupt this. Is this something you intentionally foster, or does this flow present itself naturally and organically? We will get to the mastering in a second. So yes, again, this album, Geometry of a Mushroom, was inspired by the book, this one, Microsound, I have a picture of it, from Curtis Rhodes, which is more or less about granular synthesis. And the names of the tracks were taken from this book, the time, not time divisions, how is it called there? I forgot already. The time measurements, so the different times of sound, of notes, of music. So it was taken from there. And again, it was all in my head already before I sat down and composed. And there was this, I was thinking about the album. I was thinking about the names, about the feel I want. I wanted lots of granular, of course. It was with the Morphogene, with Microcell, probably Arbor also. I think back then I had also the Nebula. I'm not so sure. It's written there on Bandcamp what I used. So yes, it was very much with the thought behind it. It was not random, more or less. I mean, it's not like it sounds like I sit down at night. I cannot sleep because the order is not what I wanted. There is thought behind it, but I'm not letting it take control over me, I guess. I make decisions quickly. I say, okay, this works. Let's go. But there is thought behind it. What mastering challenges do you run into with very complex compositions, especially with granular synthesis techniques employed in this album? I'm not so sure. I like working. I like all of this mixing, mastering, all of this. I'm not so sure if I'm really doing this because I like starting from the composition itself and then working from there. I'm not so sure about mastering challenges. I'm not so sure that I don't know if I can even call it mastering because I just make sure that it sounds nice. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not so sure. What challenges. I think never mind. I think never mind which album it is. My biggest challenge is to make the tracks sound as loud as the other tracks. So to make them sound as the levels to make them sound more or less coherent. So if track one is at certain loudness, usually what will happen is the next tracks will be either softer or louder and stuff like this. So this is, I think, a challenge that I have all the time, especially because I'm mixing on headphones, and especially because mixing and mastering on headphones, and especially because I listen to this over and over, and somehow when I listen to this, I don't realize the difference in level. So I think this is something that I always have problems with when mastering an album, is to make sure the tracks are at the same loudness. And that's very practical, because imagine that you are listening to an album and you always have to run to the level control and take it up or take it down, especially for example, you listen to track one, it's loud, you make it exactly the level you want, and then track two is really soft, and you have to crank it up, and then the track three, it's also loud, so you have to crank it down. So it's important that there will be a flow also in the level. So this is something that I always have. It's challenging, let's say. Okay, I hope this was somewhat helpful. The next question is coming from mistake number 2, I guess. Hello, hi. I just wanted to give a little background before I ask, but I will keep it brief. I use VCVREC mostly because it's just something that works well with the way my brain works, having all that fine control over everything in a system I design and therefore know. I know a reason a lot of other people go for this program is to get into generative music, which I do think could be fun, a fun side thing, but my main ideas tend to be more of structured nature. I would like to figure out how to make something with that many different kinds of layered and non-layered components, maybe put into that performance patch setting you talk a lot about. Might you have any expertise on how I might design a system of sequences for genres with less layering parts on top and more gracefully transitioning from one part to the next, more horizontal than vertical? So this is I think this is the holy grail of everyone who makes music, is how to have something more horizontal than vertical. Even if in a DAW, I also don't like working in a DAW. It's not for me. But also in a DAW, where you have control over every millisecond that happens, and you can say at this and this time something like this will happen. And you can control everything. Also, many people are just working within a loop, are working vertically and not horizontally. They are not thinking about, I'm not judging anyone. I just say that I see this a lot online. Many questions, how can I have more horizontal music making and not just be cut in a loop? And I totally understand this. And this is, again, the holy grail. I don't think there is a trick. I don't think there is one way of doing this. I think it all depends on many different aspects that change over and over and over. Something I like doing, again, you mentioned the performance patch. I like performing my music actually with the hands, turning knobs and performing. So instead of programming the song, in the words of Trovarsi, I know I say it a lot, Trovarsi says, I am song mode. So I am song mode. I am performing, and I decide when to move to the next part, how to transition, and stuff like this. What you can do, first of all, start small. Don't put yourself in the pressure of creating a whole track all of a sudden. Start small. Take one voice. Create one voice. Build one voice. Work with it for a bit and try turning knobs and see what happens and what you like and what you can use as a performative tool. For example, the sound is darker, the sound is brighter. If you map this to a controller, if you create a macro controller with something like Patchmaster, for example, you can use this as a performative tool, as transitioning from one place to another. It's all about transitions. It's all about contrast. Think of sequences. I showed before the patch with all of the different sequences with the chord progression. Think of a chord progression. Take this as a challenge to compose 30 seconds, start small, 30 seconds or maybe 1 minute of performing something, composing something. But again, start small. Don't now have a whole multi-layered patch that will take you months and you will desert it because it was too much. Start small. Start with 30 seconds. One voice, 30 seconds. See how you can transition from one place to another just with one voice. See what you like, what you don't like. Wave folding. Manipulating the clock. This is something, if you are familiar with Polypores, for example, is always manipulating the clock. There is always time changing there. Great for transitioning. Reverbs, bringing reverbs in and out. Effects, distortion. I love using distortion as a way to create tension and release. Try and pick aspects that you like about one voice, just one, and use it as a performative tool. Perform this voice for 30 seconds or 1 minute. Try adding a sequence and transitioning from the sequence. And VCVREC, by the way, this is commercial, but if you want to have more control and more horizontal sequencing, I really recommend the entry and modules. Again, it's commercial. I think it's maybe $30. I'm not so sure. But it's great. It's a sort of a piano roll. Yes, it's similar to a DAW, but again, if you want modular sequencing, and it's more horizontal, I think this can really help you, because you can have, as you can see, there are windows here open. You can have all sorts of different tracks here. So you can choose, for example, a melody track, right? And then you have a piano roll where you can actually make your, your melody and your composition, right? And then you can have another track that will be, for example, a drum clip, right? Which will look different, which is more for drums, right? And stuff like this. And you can even have one for modulation or MIDI, even if you have MIDI, but you can have one for CV and gates, right? So you can have also, for example, transitioning with modulation, with automation or whatever. I know it's more like a DAW and this is not what you're looking for, but this can help you with sequencing, just sequencing without all the voices and everything, just sequencing that will be more horizontal. And again, start small. Don't overwhelm yourself. Don't give yourself pressure. Put yourself under pressure for creating a whole song, a whole track. This is all about practice and realizing and finding what you like and what you don't like. There is no magic trick. There is no shortcut for this. It's something that you have to sit down and work on and try and figure out. Again, take one voice, just one voice, and think what you like about it and how you can transition from this voice to a different sound within this voice. Maybe add some effects, maybe add some modulation, take modulation in and out and create transitions. It's all about transitions. It's all about contrast. So start small. And I hope this was helpful. The next one is from Golden Pyramid. Hi. Do you still use TouchDesigner for visuals? Do you ever think about doing more tutorials with TouchDesigner? Or have you found other software that interface well with Rec? So I don't really use TouchDesigner anymore. And I don't think I will make tutorials with TouchDesigner. I don't use it just because I don't have the time to learn it. It's so much fun. It's very modular. It's very reminding of the modular environment. You patch cables, you patch modules, and you create visuals. It's amazing. If you have time, anyone who's watching this, if you have time, if you want to get into visual and stuff like this, I really recommend TouchDesigner. It's amazing. It's fun. I just don't have time. Making music, working with VCV, making videos, and all the other stuff I'm doing. I just don't have time to learn something new and to dig deeper into it. I mean, I can make basic things, but that's more or less it. I have a preset that I save that I really like, that I use from time to time just to put it on the screen when I make videos or something like this. But I don't really use it. I heard of a different software called Hydra, which can also work with VCV, I believe. I'm not so sure. Have a look, but I didn't find anything else. And I hope one day to go back to this because it was really, really fun. The next one is coming from Thomas. Hi. I see that you are using Voltage Block and I think it is your favorite module indeed. Is there any way to make a VCV patch that replicates all of the functionality of this module? Indeed, the Voltage Block is an amazing module. I really recommend it. If there is a way to replicate all of its functionality, no, but most of it, yes. I mean, you can use different sequencers in VCV that have some of the functionality of the Voltage Block, which is this one here. But you can also create some of most of the functionality of it with different modules in VCV. I'll show you this in a second. So for example, the main module, of course, is the ADDR sequencer, the ADDR sequencer from Bog Audio with the expander, because the Voltage Block has 16 steps. It has basically 8 sequences with 16 steps, right? So this is like one channel, one sequence, right? It has 16 steps and you can use as many as you want. You don't have to use just 8. Right, so you have a 16-step sequence. You can change the sequence length, right, with this knob from 1 to 16, right? So you have also on the Voltage Block, for each sequence, you can have a different length. right? So also with the ADDR sequencer, then you can use also a clock division for the voltage block. You can set clock division with a shift, with a divide here. You can divide each of the sequences. And also here you use R gate for this. So you connect your clock to R gate, right? And then here you can divide the clock. In this case, in VCV, you can also multiply it if you want. Right, so you have also clock division. Then you have ADDR mode. So the voltage block has also a CV input that you can use to address the steps. Instead of clocking it, you can also use CV to jump between the steps with offset and attenuation, right? So also in VCV, I use the CV mix, and this is going to the select CV input, which is basically ADDR. This is what it's called, the ADDR sequencer. It's address mode, right? So you can attenuate, you can offset, right? And you can use external, we will see this also in a second, external signals to sequence the ADDR. And there is also the play direction. On the voltage block, you can go forward, reverse, and you have also pendulum and random sequence. On the ADDR, you have only forward and reverse, but it's also quite fun. What else there is on the voltage block? You can save sequences. In VCV, it's not so important, I guess. You can mute sequences. Also in VCV, you can just use a mute. And you can add glide on the voltage block per step. If you want glide per step in VCV, you need another sequencer that will sequence the glide. So I didn't add this. If you want glide per step, I guess using a different sequencer will be better, something from impromptu or something like this. But this has most of the functionality. And again, this is like one channel and you can use as many as you want. So for example, I have here something set here. I have one of these controlling the pitch of the FM operator with a 16-step sequence. Right, then I have another of these controlling the feedback amount, right? But in this case, there are just 12 steps, right? So the pitch sequence has 16 steps, but the modulation sequence has 12 steps. And this is great with the voltage block because you have, for each of the sequences, you can set different length, right? Then there's another sequence here for pitch, but in this case, it's with a clock division of 2, and it has only 7 steps. Oh, actually, this is not pitch. Actually, this is filter. Right, so this will modulate the filter cutoff. Right, it's even running in reverse, as you can see. And then there is another one that is controlling pitch, but it's in ADDR mode. So I'm using an LFO to drive the sequencer again through the CV mix. And you can see it's going back and forth in a sort of a pendulum. Right, and I can offset it. Right, so again, you have this sort of strip, I guess, or channel that you can use as many as you want. And it has most of the functionality of the voltage block, not all of it. But yeah, it's quite fun. The next one is from Vladi. Hi. Thanks for your brilliant works. Thank you so much for your support, Vladi. Is there any way to use MPE with VCV rack, and which could be your suggestions on it? So there are 2 things you can try. The MIDI modules from VCV rack have also MPE mode. If you right click and go to polyphony mode, there is MPE. Right, for the MIDI to CV, and also the MIDI CC to CV has also MPE, right? And then for MPE, you need the CC number 74. So you can just write 74, right, on one of the slots, and then you have the parameter for the MPE, right? So you can use the MIDI modules, or there is the MIDI, poly, and MPE module from Models, I guess, available for free. It has MPE, it has pitch bend and everything else you need, and it has also a dedicated output for the CC74 if you need it. So you can use either the MIDI modules from VCV or this module from Models. The next one is from Roman Poyo. Hi. I was and still am a fan of 70s sympho rock music like Yes, Camel and Genesis, and want to use some non-standard time signatures and tempo changes in my music. Can you show us how to use non-standard time signatures like 7/8, 5/8 and how to combine this with 4/4, 3/4 and others in sequence? And how to use accents in rhythm? Using tempo changes would be also nice to explain, demonstrate would be great. So this is a great question. It's a subject for a whole video. It can be an interesting video. Let me know if it's worth a video. But first of all, about accents, I have a whole video I did about velocity and accents. So I will not show this here. I will put a link in the description to this video. If you want accents, go watch it. Quite fun. Lots of things you can do. But let's speak about time signatures a bit, because this is quite interesting in the modular environment. And when you are not notating things, this can be quite fun. So first of all, there are a few clocks that you can use that have different time signatures that you can switch. For example, here there is 4/4. I can change this to 7/8, for example. Right, or 5/8 as you said, or 5/4, the same with the one from Bido. This is from AS. This here is from Bido, so I can have, for example, again 7/8, for example, right? So you have a clock that you can choose, but this is not enough. And let me show you. Here I have the clock set with 7/8, right? And this is running the Sec3. Listen what happens. This will trigger the tremor to listen to what happens when I run this. Does this sound like 7/8 to you? No. Because we still have 8 steps and the clock is just, right, outputting or generating a clock signal. Instead of resetting after 8, it will reset after 7. Right, so most of the time, an easy way you can create different time signatures is basically with the sequencer itself, with the number of steps. The number of steps will dictate the time signature you are in. So in this, again, this is in the modular environment. So here, for example, let's have an example, and I will show you more examples in a second. So here I have a clock set to 120 BPM, right? And I'm using the main clock, which is basically multiplied by 1. It's just using multiplied by 1 clock to clock the Sec3. Now, something you should understand, in most cases, when you use a multiplied by 1 clock, you get basically quarter notes. Okay, so if you have, for example, a time signature of 4/4, it means that you have 4 quarter notes per bar. What was this? I'm not so sure, right? So you have 4 quarter notes. I'm sorry if it's loud, they are building here. 4 quarter notes per bar. So if you want 4/4, you use quarter notes. If I want 5/4, then I need 5 quarter notes per bar. So all what I have to do is change this. Let's change the rhythm here a bit. Right, so now again, we get quarter notes. If I change the step number to be 5, we get 5 quarter notes. Right, so now we have a sequence of 5/4. Right, it's not 4/4. It's 5/4. We have 5 quarter notes per bar. Right, now what if I want to have 7/8, for example, which means 7/8 notes? So if quarter notes are multiplied by 1, 8 notes will be multiplied by 2, and then we need a sequence of 7 steps. And then we have 7/8. Right? So just by changing the sequence itself, we change the time signature. And this is good news, because then we can have different sequences running at the same time with different time signatures, different meters, right? Polymeters, right? Multiple meters running at the same time. right? But let's say that I want this to be quicker, right? I don't want this to be, I want the resolution of the sequence to be to be deeper, basically. And what I mean by this, let's say that, for example, I want again 7/8, but instead of 8 notes, I want 16th notes. I want more resolution. I want more change within this sequence. So if we say that 8 notes is multiplied by 2, if I want 16th notes, I have to multiply it again by 2, which we get multiplied by 4. This is why you see me usually use multiplied by 4 clock, because the resolution is then 16th notes, which means that I can have more hits in between. I hope it makes sense, right? So if I want 7/8, which means 7/8 notes, but I multiplied this by 2, I get 14 16th notes. So the sequence length will be 14, and then the clock resolution will be 16th notes, right? So it will sound like this. This is still 7/8. This is still the same meter, but I just have more resolution. Instead of 7 steps, I have 14 steps. So I can have more steps in between. I hope it makes sense. Right? For the hi-hats, for example, for the noise section here, I have 4/4. How do you get 4/4? You can just use the quarter notes from the clock itself. Again, multiplied by 1, or the main clock from clocked, is basically quarter notes. Right? So I have 4 on the floor, let's say. Right? So together with the 7/8. Right? So you get an interesting rhythm. Again, we have 7/8. And we have 4/4, so we have now a polymeter, or we have polymeters, or polymeter, or multiple meters, 7/8 and 4/4 playing together. Right? The same with 5/4, for example. So what if I want to have a meter of 5/4, but again have more resolution? I don't want quarter notes, I want 8 notes. So again, you multiply this by 2. Instead of quarter notes, you get 8 notes. So instead of 5 quarter notes, you get 10 8 notes. Just multiply this by 2. So the sequence length will be 10, right? So I have here a sequence of 10 steps. Right? This is now 5/4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, right? But the resolution, I can enter more notes because it's running with a faster clock, basically. Right? So instead of multiplied by 1 for quarter notes, it's multiplied by 2 for 8 notes, and the sequence is also longer. Right? Instead of 5 steps, I have 10 steps. Right? So together with the other. Right, now for having, first of all, like this, you can have multiple meters, again, polymeters within a patch. But if you want to switch things, so for example, if I want now, let's say that I want this to be 7/8, right? But then, so it will switch to, let's say, 5/4, right? So you can program with the gate sequencer. It's a great sequencer for stuff like this. You program 14 steps, and then you go ahead, let's say, let's copy this, right? And instead of 14 steps, you have then 10 steps, right? This is 10 steps. And now you have 5/4, but again with 16th notes. No, then you need multiplied by 4, then you need 40 steps actually. So let's do this. Let's have, right, 5/4. That's 5 steps. No, that's 20 steps. 20 steps is here. That's 21. That's here, right? So now you have here. Right? So now you have here 5/4. Here you have 7/8. But I need to change here also the sequence to 14. That's 12, 14. Right, so here, I hope it makes sense. I'm sorry, it's a bit convoluted what I did now. But again, you have here 7, 8. I don't want 8 notes, I want 16th notes. So I have to multiply this by 2. Right, so instead of using multiplied by 2, which is 8 notes, I use multiplied by 4, which is 16th notes. And for the second sequence, I want 5, 4. I want it to switch from 7, 8 to 5, 4. Now 5, 4, it's 5 quarter notes. Multiplied this by 2, we have 10 8 notes. Multiplied this by 2 again, we have 20 16th notes. So it's a sequence of 20 steps, which is this. Right? And like this, you can switch between them, you can create a song. The same with the note sequencer. Also here, you can sequence the length, right? And you can sequence the different lengths and create different movements or transitions between different time signatures. Another thing you can do, just like when you chain different sequences with a switch, with a sequential switch like I'm doing here, you can chain also different lengths, right? So here I have 7, 8, right? I have multiplied by 2 clock, which is 8 notes with 7 steps. So we have 7, 8. And then I have 3, 4, switching to a 3, 4. So 3 quarter notes. Again, in this case, I want 16th notes. So I multiply this by 4. 4 times 4, 16. 3 times 4, 12. So I have a length of 12 steps, right, in this sequence. So we get... Right? So we get a different feel, I guess. Right, and you get polymeters. Basically, if you want different meters, if you want different time signatures, use your sequencer, change the length of the sequence. Think about clock resolution. Multiplied by 1 is quarter notes. Multiplied by 2 is 8 notes. Multiplied by 4 is 16th notes. Multiplied by 8 will be then 32nd notes. Right, multiplied by 16 will be 64th if you want even more resolution, if you want to create all sorts of different ornaments. But just think that also your sequence has to be longer, right? If you have 5 quarter notes, you want 8 notes, you have 10 8 notes, right? So you have a sequence of 10. So you have to multiply the sequence length also. Right, so here, for example, with the gate sequencer, you have up to 64 steps, which is multiplied by 16, I guess. I'm not, you have to look it up. Right? So this is basically something you can try to get different time signatures. The next one is from Thomas. Hi. Is there any way to process an audio signal to transpose it live? I've been experimenting using VCVREC to process audio signals from a mic, similar fashion as Sarah will read. And what I want to do is sing into the mic a C note and transpose the signal to an E to create harmony. It would be interesting to use it for synths too. I have been trying to use stack from Borg Audio or quad-stepped offset from Live4 Modular, but they seem to only work for stable pitch information. So there is something to understand here. If you want to transpose a pitch of audio, you need a pitch shifter that will shift the pitch. Now this is done usually with granular synthesis in some sort of way. It's not so easy as it might sound. You don't just send your audio into a quantizer and it will quantize it, or into something like stack. From Borg Audio it will not work. But what you can do is use Supercell or clouds if you want, because Supercell has also a built-in pitch shifter. Let's see, let me take this out for a second. Right, so here I have a cello, a sample of a cello, which will be like you singing into a mic. It's a C note, right? Nothing too amazing. right? And now I want to have this C note and have another copy of it also transposed. So I'm going to send this into Supercell, right? A copy of it into Supercell. Take the mix all the way up because I have already the dry signal. Take the size all the way up. Take the density all the way up. So it will always generate grains. And it will be more or less in time. There will be some slight delay because it still has to process things, but it will still create a nice effect, right? And then with the pitch, you can pitch shift it. So if I want E, I'm just going to use ref tone from Bog Audio just to send the note E, right, to the volt per octave input. And now listen to it. Right, so now we got C and E playing together. Again, there is a bit of delay because it still has to process things, but you can take this even further and have a whole chord. You can use another one, right, and set another copy to another one, and this is G, for example, right? And also here I have to change everything. So mix all the way up, density all the way up, size all the way up, experiment with the different parameters, see maybe something else sounds better. Right, but now you get a whole chord. So you can experiment with Supercell, or if you want to use clouds, it's more or less the same, but Supercell is easier to see everything. And again, mix all the way up because you have already the dry signal, density all the way up because you want it to generate grains fully, or you can experiment with this, of course, and see something maybe you would like more a granular feel, and the grain size you can also experiment with, and also the shape, it will change how the smearing of the sound. If I take it all the way to the right, you will hear it, for example. Right, it's a bit more smeared. But anyway, this might work for what you need. Another one from Thomas, another quick question more into music theory. I'm a big fan of nu jazz, a subgenre of jazz that utilizes a lot of electronic elements, in addition to common jazz instruments. Music in vein of bonobo, the cinematic orchestra, or jaga jazzist. Do you know, I'm sorry again for the noise they are building here right outside. Do you know any tips, tricks to create some jazz harmony and in context of VCV using chords and scales? So I'm not so sure if there are any tricks to create jazz harmony. If you know the harmony, if you know the chords that you want to use, you can just program them. The only thing I could think of is the meander module that will create harmony and arpeggios and bass and stuff like this, and that you can use. It's basically a sequencer that will create all of the harmonies. Wow, that's really loud. I'm really sorry for this. That will create all sorts of harmonies that you can choose, and you can modulate things, and you have outputs, volt per octave and everything, 1, 2, 3, and then also harmony for the chords, I guess. And you can change also the presets. So here, for example, classic, something doo-wop and jazz, 1, 6, 2, 5, but there are also longer progressions, as you can see. And there are also all sorts of different jazz progressions. Look at this one here. This is a long one. Hallelujah, hallelujah. There is all sorts of different progressions here. I saw also some sort of jazz ones somewhere here. Yeah, but there are all sorts of different progressions that you can use here. So I'm not so sure if it's a trick or a tip or whatever, but here, jazz 4, jazz 3, all sorts of different things. Here, you have all sorts of different progressions anyway. You can choose the mode also and change all sorts of things. So I guess, I don't know. I mean, if you know the harmony that you want to use, so just program it, or try and experiment with meander. This can also maybe help you. The next one is from Marcus. Hi, I'm really fascinated by the booklet-like modules from nysthi, soy modules, Su and Su utils. I wonder if you can, that's a source of uncertainty, I guess. I wonder if you can show some cool combinations with the two modules together with VCOs, filters, and envelope. So this is a subject for a whole video. Source of uncertainty, there is the main module that will generate voltage, and then there is the utilities that will process this voltage. So I have here a few examples, stuff that you can try. For example, I have here this output here, the stepped random voltage that you can see here on the scope. I want to use it for pitch information, so I can use the utilities to attenuate it, as you can see here, scale and offset. I can attenuate it and bring it exactly to the range I want, which is the result here, the yellow trace on the scope. And even more, what I'm doing here, I'm using the second stepped voltage. Again, I'm scaling and offsetting it, and you can see this here again on the scope. And I'm using it to offset the pitch information, so to basically to transpose the pitch. So I have one that will create a pitch variation and one that will transpose it up and down, again, together with the scale and offset, which will sound like this. Right, so you can hear the transposition. You can see this here also, how it works together. Right, so this is, for example, one thing you can do. I have here also, where is it? Here. I'm using again, in this case, a VCO and a filter, and I'm using again this output here, this voltage output as pitch information, but there is also the octave folder here on the utilities, which will basically be like attenuating or selecting a certain range, but in octaves apart, so in 1 volt. So you can go from 0 to 10 volts and select the minimum and maximum. So in this case, I have 0 to 2, so I have 2 octaves, right? And this will move in increments of 1 volt, so it will be basically an octave apart, right? So this will be the sequence for the bass, because I don't want the bass to go too up in pitch. I want it to stay in the bass range of 2 octaves. So I could use this, right, to make sure the range will be just 2 octaves. And there is also a shift register that you can use to create chords, right? So in this case, I'm using the pitch information that I use from the first voice, from this one, right, which is also moving because of the transposition. And I'm using it to create chords. You can see it goes in the input. Again, they are building here. I'm sorry for the noise. It goes to the input, and from the output, we have 4 outputs, right, that will generate 4 different notes according to the sequence. And this, I'm using 4 oscillators, mixing them to create chords that will move together with the sequence, right? Right, so again, this is a subject for a whole video. We have here voltage generators, right? And a way also to process, to scale them, offset them, shift register, right, to process these voltages. The next one is from Jason. Hi, thank you for all your lessons and tutorials. Thank you so much for your support. I am a classically trained pianist and love generative music. I would like to create a generative patch that switches from major to minor or vice versa while maintaining some sort of resemblance of a song. An example would be Beethoven's Third Symphony. It goes from E-flat major to C minor and back to E-flat major. I would like to have it evolve over time, hit record and see where it goes. I hope that makes sense. Yes, indeed. Thank you thank you again for your support. And if I'm ever at I come to Nashville, I will definitely hit you up for breakfast or something. Okay, so first of all, there is something I want. It's a bit connected and a bit not connected. Something I want people to understand a bit in the modular environment. And anyway, with music theory, you mentioned C minor and E-flat major. Basically, they are the same notes And it all depends where you start. So these are the notes of the C minor scale. Right? And then goes back to C. And these are the notes of the E flat major. Right? And it goes round and round. It's the same notes as C minor. Just depends what you call home. So this is just something I wanted to show. Because when you have a sequence, for example, you sequence something and you want to stay in the E flat major scale, you put the notes of the E flat major, but as you can see, the notes of the E flat major are also the notes of the C minor. This is the same with A minor and C major, for example. It's the same notes. So just make sure, right? What is it? Is it C minor or is it E flat major? So it all depends how you tune your oscillator and what notes you have emphasis on. Just something I wanted to show you. But if you want to create generative patches that move from one chord to another, from one harmony to another, from one key to another, I really recommend using the modules from Aaron Static. So here I have the scale CV that will change the scale or the key, right? You have the root and you have the mode, and you can see that I'm sequencing both of them, and it will go from C minor. In this case, it's called D sharp major, which is E flat major. It's just, there is no flats here. There is just sharp, I guess, or in the right click menu, no. It will not show flat, it will show sharp. Never mind, but it goes from C minor to E flat major. And then this will dictate the scale. And then we have here chords that will come out from this scale that changes. When the scale changes, also the chord change. Now I have here, I'm sequencing the scale because I want some stability, but the chords are being chosen randomly with sample and hold. Now it's not just being chosen randomly, it's also with different timings. I'm using here an LFO to clock the sample and hold, which is in turn modulating the frequency of the LFO. So there is feedback modulation. Let me do this just a bit. Feedback modulation that will create random or generative timing. So it will sound like this. Right? C minor still. And it will change. I decided to use the countdown module that after 30 triggers from the LFO, it will change the key or the scale. Now this will also happen generatively because the timing of the LFO is always changing according to the sample and hold. So there is a generative element there. Let's wait for it. 2 more triggers. 1. And now E flat. Right, so now the chords are from the E flat major key. It changed. Of course, the sound design, you will work on the sound design. It's just an FM operator. Right? But like this, you can generatively go from one scale to another. And you can use the scale CV also to quantize external signals. Like from a sequencer, I have the Sec3, sequencing another FM operator with some delay. And this will also change according to the scale, right? So now again, it's D sharp or E flat. Let's listen to this with the chords. Right, 13. Let's make this a bit quicker. Two, 1. C minor. And again, don't forget, it's basically the same scale or the same notes, but it will be transposed, it will be offsetted, it will be offset higher in pitch because you take it from C to E or E flat. But again, Aaron Static, if you want generative harmonies and stuff like this, go with Aaron Static and experiment a bit. The last question is coming from Tobias. Hi, I'm correctly informed you don't perform live like in front of a crowd or something like that, so maybe this is the wrong place for this question, but lately I'm struggling a bit with getting a setup together that is flexible and also not too complex. By that I mean intuitive. I play together in jam sessions with other musicians a lot, but every time I prepare myself for it, I feel a bit lost. I prepare VCV patches and sometimes even grab my hardware rack with the ES9 to expand it, but it feels like I'm so limited to the patch I developed. All the voices I prepared sound cool, but sometimes I have a hard time to integrate them into the current mood of the jam. I feel like it would be easier to grab a keyboard and play a VST synth instead and not a complex organism. Anyways, do you know some combinations in VCV that are pretty flexible and live compatible with a MIDI controller and a keyboard? So there are two things here. So first of all, you say that you feel like you are limited to the patch, but on the other hand, you say that you feel like playing a VST synth and not something complex is better. So I'm not so sure I understand if you want something simpler or if you want something more complex. But in any case, I know it's easy, especially with VCV Rack, it's easy because there are so many modules available out there and for free even, just to add things and to create something really big and complex. Try small, try limiting yourself to something very, very simple. Just a few modules. If you say that you prefer to play a VST synth, for example, which one? Take one that you like and try and recreate it in VCV. Most of them are more or less the same. You have 1, 2, 3 oscillators, you have a noise source, you have a filter, you have a few effects, a few envelopes. Most of them are more or less the same. And so try and create this setup. Try, for example, take 2 oscillators, a mixer, a filter, maybe an envelope, maybe 2 envelopes, and that's it. And again, we spoke about this in an earlier question, but sit with it alone, without the band, without the jam session, and learn it. There is no shortcut. There is no magic trick that will make you do everything. You have to sit down and learn the instrument, just like you learn a piano, just like you learn a guitar. Learn what you like, learn what you don't like, how to change the sound, how to transition from one place to another. Create macro controls. Use the Patch Master, which is perfect for this. And create macro controls with one change of a knob. You can create a whole different sound. And start small and learn. And also, yes, learn and don't change always things. I know it's easy in VCV Rack because there is so much, and you always feel, also for me, I'm saying it also to me, always feel like I'm missing out. There's so much out there. Why am I using just this oscillator all the time and I'm not using the 10 other oscillators that are available? But give it time. It's all about practice. It's all about experience. It's all about getting intuitive with the instrument. You cannot be intuitive in the instrument if you change it all the time. So try and start small. Build one sound that you can play with the keyboard, that you have maybe 1 or 2 macro controls that you like how they sound. And that's it. And learn it and experiment with it. See the sounds that it can create. See if you are missing something, maybe a wave folder, maybe distortion or something like this. Or see if it's too much. Maybe you want something simple. Add reverb, of course, because reverb is important. And again, start small. Don't overwhelm yourself. You mentioned also that sometimes you even take your hardware with you. I have a feeling that if I was, for example, in a room with other musicians and they are playing guitars, they are jamming the drums, and I have to start building a patch there, I will get lost. And unless it's something that I like a system that I know really well, If I have to add always stuff and say, okay, maybe this and maybe this, maybe I will get lost and they will be bored with me because it takes so long. So it's better if you have something prepared, that you learn it also, you know more or less the direction it can go, but still leave some place for surprise and experimentation. That's always nice. And always start small. And again, you mentioned the VST synth. Take the VST. Let me know also which one is it. I'm curious to know which VST you like playing, because most of them are more or less the same. The structure, I mean, of course not the sound, but the structure. A few oscillators, noise, filters, envelopes, LFOs. Most of them are more or less the same. And you can build stuff like this in VCVRack. And again, start small. I don't know what types of sound you prepare, if you are the drums or you are the bass or you are everything. I'm not so sure what the other musicians that you play with are playing, but let me know and I will try to help you out with this. But start small. Always, I know it's easy in VCVRack just to add things, but start small and learn the instrument that you are using. Okay, and that was it. Thank you again, Patreon, so much for your support. Thank you again, PathSet, for your donations to the monthly giveaways on Discord. If you're a Patreon, come join us on Discord. If you're not a Patreon, come join us on Patreon. Thank you again for watching. Cheers.